June 4th, 1944, 2:17 a.m. Somewhere in the dark waters of the Philippine Sea, the ocean was quiet, but not peaceful. A sudden flash ripped through the night. A Japanese naval shell slammed into the front structure of an American destroyer, tearing through steel like it was nothing. In a fraction of a second, it exploded inside the ship's control room. The blast killed men instantly. Metal fragments shot through narrow corridors, bouncing off walls, slicing through anything in their path. Smoke filled the air. Lights flickered. Then, another hit. This time, the engine section. Power dropped. The ship slowed. Then a third shell, and a fourth. In less than 90 seconds, a fast, proud warship had turned into a burning target in the middle of the ocean. Flames climbed into the night sky. The ship tilted slightly. Systems were failing one by one. Any textbook, any naval officer, any trained commander would have made the same decision in that moment. Retreat. Disappear into smoke. Survive. But that's not what happened. Instead, a decision was made that should not have made sense. A decision that would change how naval warfare worked forever. Because while that ship was burning, someone on board believed the fight was just beginning. To understand why, you need to forget everything you think you know about World War II naval battles. Not the clean maps, not the arrows moving across oceans, not the victory headlines. The real war was different, messy, confusing, deadly. And in the Pacific Ocean, one thing mattered more than anything else: who could see first and who could fire first. Between 1942 and early 1944, Japanese destroyer forces had become some of the most dangerous units in the entire war. They didn't rely on luck. They trained for this. For years before the war even started, Japanese crews practiced night combat again and again. They learned how to fight in darkness like it was daylight. They mastered torpedoes. They understood angles, movement, timing, almost like instinct. And when the war came, it showed. Especially in one place, Guadalcanal. In just a few months of fighting there, the United States Navy lost more ships in night battles than it did in the entire Atlantic Ocean during the same time. Think about that. Different ocean. Same war. Completely different outcome. Why? Because at night, American ships were almost blind. Visibility in those waters was terrible. Sometimes you couldn't see beyond a few thousand yards. By the time someone spotted an enemy torpedo, it was already too late. By the time guns were aimed, the target had already moved. Shots missed. Not because sailors were unskilled, but because they were always reacting too late. The Japanese knew this, and they used it perfectly. They would attack from a distance no one could see, launch torpedoes, then disappear into darkness. Moments later, they would return from a different angle and finish the job with gunfire. Fast, clean, effective. American ships kept getting hit. Crews kept dying. And no matter how brave they were, bravery alone couldn't solve the problem. Because in night combat, courage doesn't aim guns. Accuracy does. So the Navy tried to fix it. More training, better formations, more aggressive tactics, but nothing worked fast enough. Losses continued. And somewhere deep inside American warships, in radar rooms and equipment spaces, a different kind of solution was starting to form. Not from an admiral, not from a commander, but from someone no one expected. He was young, only 24 years old. Before the war, he wasn't a soldier or a strategist or a decorated officer. He fixed radios in a small shop in Ohio. That was it. When he joined the Navy, he thought his skills would keep him away from danger, that he would stay behind equipment, safe from the chaos of battle. He was wrong. He ended up exactly where the danger was, on a destroyer, in the middle of the Pacific. And more importantly, inside the radar room. Now here's where things get interesting, because the technology that could have solved everything was already there. Radar? American ships had it. They could detect enemies even in complete darkness. But there was a problem. They weren't using it the right way. Official doctrine said this: first, find the enemy with your eyes. Then use radar to help with distance. Radar was just a backup tool, not the main system. But to him, that idea made no sense at all. Why depend on eyes when you have something that can see in the dark? Quietly, without making noise, he started thinking differently. What if radar wasn't the backup? What if it was the main weapon? What if you didn't need to see the enemy at all? Because if radar could track movement and calculate position, then technically, you could fire without ever seeing anything. That idea sounds obvious today, but back then, it went against everything the Navy believed. And more importantly, it came from the wrong person. He wasn't an officer. He didn't have authority. He didn't have rank, just a technician with grease on his hands. When he tried to explain it, people listened politely, then ignored him. He was told to focus on maintenance, not ideas, not theory, not changing how war worked. But he didn't stop, because he wasn't guessing anymore. He was sure. So, instead of asking for permission, he did something far more dangerous. He started building it himself. Late at night, inside the ship, using spare parts, he created a simple connection, a cable. Nothing complicated, but what it did changed everything. It connected the radar system directly to the ship's firing controls. No delay, no human translation, no hitting. Before this, information had to pass through people. Radar, officer calculations, guns. It took time, sometimes minutes. His system removed all of that. Radar, guns, direct, fast, accurate, during drills, during routine operations, comparing results again and again. The difference was not small, it was massive. What normally took over a minute now took seconds. What usually missed now landed close, very close. This wasn't improvement, this was transformation. But there was still one problem. The Navy didn't know, and if they found out the wrong way, he could be punished. Because technically, what he did was illegal, unauthorized modification of military equipment, a serious offense. But he didn't remove it. He kept it running, hidden in plain sight, waiting. Because sooner or later, there would be a real test. Not a drill, not practice, but combat. And when that moment came, everything would change. For weeks, nothing happened. The cable stayed in place. The system kept running. And no one outside that small radar room really understood what had been built. It was working, but it hadn't been tested where it mattered, not in drills. Not in theory. In real combat. That moment came quietly. No warning, no dramatic announcement. Just a message received through fleet communication channels. Possible enemy surface group detected, moving south of the Philippines. The American destroyers changed course immediately. Speed increased. Engines pushed harder. Somewhere ahead, in total darkness, enemy ships were moving. No lights, no radio signals, just shadows on the ocean. Standard procedure was clear. Close the distance, confirm visually, then fire. That's how it had always been done. That's how officers were trained. But this time, something was different. One of the commanders had seen the test results. He had read the numbers. And, more importantly, he understood what those numbers meant. Time. In night combat, time is everything. Seconds decide survival. Minutes decide victory. If they followed normal procedure, they would need several minutes before firing accurately. And in those minutes, the enemy would already act. Launch torpedoes, change position, disappear. So he made a decision. A quiet one, but a dangerous one. He gave an order that broke standard doctrine. Use radar as primary. Do not wait for visual confirmation. Fire when the solution is ready. On the bridge, officers hesitated. This was not how things were done. But the order stood. Down in the radar room, he heard it, and for the first time, his system was about to be used in real combat. The screen in front of him showed faint returns, blurry shapes at long range. Not clear ships, just signals. But to him, that was enough. He adjusted the controls carefully, filtering noise, separating signals, tracking movement. 3 targets, moving together, speed steady, course predictable. The system began calculating range, direction, speed, all updating in real time, not minutes, seconds. The solution started to stabilize. On the bridge, the gunnery team waited. No one could see anything, just darkness. And then the call came. Solution ready. There was still nothing visible outside. No enemy ships. No lights. No confirmation. Just a decision. Trust the system, or wait like always. They didn't wait. Fire. The first salvo left the guns. Flashes lit up the ship for a split second. Then darkness again. Everyone watched, waiting. A few seconds later, splashes appeared in the distance. Still no ship visible, just water exploding where the rounds landed. But something was different. The pattern was tight, very tight. Not random, not searching, precise. Second salvo. Fired faster this time, because the system was already tracking, already adjusting. More splashes, closer. Then, a shape appeared. Not from sight, but from impact. A Japanese destroyer suddenly revealed itself in the worst possible way. By being hit, the third salvo connected. Metal tore. Fire erupted. And only now, after being struck, the enemy became visible. On their side, confusion. There had been no warning, no sighting, no time to react. They did what they were trained to do: smoke, evasion, torpedoes. But they were already too late, because the American ship had never lost track. Even when the enemy disappeared into smoke, the radar still saw them. Every movement, every turn, every attempt to escape. And the guns kept firing, not at where the enemy had been, but where it was going. The engagement lasted only minutes. One enemy ship damaged badly. Another hit. The third forced to retreat, and on the American side, no damage, no casualties. It was over before it properly began. But the most important part was not the result. It was what had just happened. For the first time, an American warship had fought and hit targets in complete darkness without ever seeing them. No visual contact, no traditional targeting, no delay, just radar and fire. Up on the bridge, officers didn't celebrate. They stood still, processing what they had just seen, because they understood something immediately. This wasn't just a better method. This changed everything. If this system worked consistently, the night combat was no low, nudger, equal. Darkness was no longer protection, and the advantage the Japanese had built for years was suddenly gone. After the battle, reports were written, carefully, formally. The language was controlled, measured, but the numbers were clear. Time to first accurate fire drastically reduced. Accuracy significantly improved. Enemy response window almost eliminated. The recommendation was simple: test this further, expand its use. But one thing was missing from the report. A name, the system was mentioned, the results were recorded. But the person who built it was not, because in large institutions, results matter, but credit does not always follow. Still, it didn't matter anymore. The idea was out. The proof existed, and now it couldn't be ignored. Other ships started testing similar setups, quietly, without changing official doctrine, because officially, nothing had changed. But in reality, everything had. And somewhere far away, the enemy had already started noticing something strange. American ships were no longer fighting the same way. They were faster, more accurate, more dangerous, and most importantly, they were hitting targets before they could even be seen. At first, it didn't make sense. Then reports started coming in. More encounters, more damage, more confusion. Something had changed, but they didn't know what, not yet. And while both sides were still trying to understand what was happening, time was running. Because what had just worked once was about to spread. And when it did, it would force decisions, difficult ones. Inside the American command structure, some people were ready to move forward. Others were not. And the next phase of this story was not about technology. It was about resistance, authority, and a single decision that could have stopped everything. By late 1944, something strange was happening in the Pacific. American destroyers were no longer fighting the same way. Engagements that used to take 10 minutes were ending in 5. Ships that should have survived were being hit immediately. And most confusing of all, enemy crews reported being attacked before they could even see who was firing. At first, these reports were dismissed. War is chaotic. Mistakes happen. Perception is unreliable in darkness. But then the pattern continued, again and again and again. Different ships, different locations, same result. This was no longer coincidence. This was a shift. Inside American command, reports began to gather. Data, after-action summaries, performance comparisons, and buried inside all of it was the same conclusion. Radar-controlled fire was outperforming traditional methods. By a lot. Some officers saw this and immediately understood. This needed to be expanded, fast, but not everyone agreed. Because changing how an entire Navy fights is not simple. It's not just about being right. It's about doctrine, procedure, responsibility, risk. And at the center of that resistance was a senior officer, an experienced admiral, respected, decorated, a man who had spent decades in naval warfare. He wasn't against innovation. He wasn't incompetent. He simply believed something very dangerous, that the current system existed for a reason, and more importantly, that bypassing it could create new risks. His concern was clear. What if radar made a mistake? What if a friendly ship was misidentified? What if one wrong decision destroyed your own fleet? From his perspective, this wasn't progress, it was risk. So when the recommendation reached him, he didn't approve it. He delayed it. Weeks passed. The file didn't move, and while it sat on a desk, ships were still going out into the night, fighting with slower systems, taking risks that didn't need to exist anymore. Some officers knew this. They had seen the results. They had witnessed the difference, and one of them decided waiting was no longer an option. If the system couldn't be approved on paper, it would be proven in reality. A demonstration was arranged. Not a small one, not controlled. A full night combat simulation, real conditions, multiple targets, observers present. If the system worked, it would be undeniable. If it failed, everything would end there. No second chance. On the night of the test, the ocean was dark. Cloud cover blocked most of the light. Visibility was poor. Exactly the kind of situation where traditional methods struggled. 3 fast-moving targets were deployed. Unpredictable movement, combat speed. On board one destroyer, inside a radar wing, he sat in front of the system he had built. Months of work, risk, doubt, all leading to this moment. The signals appeared, faint at first, then clearer. 3 separate targets, moving fast, close together. This was difficult even for radar. Returns could merge. Tracking could fail. He adjusted the system, fine-tuned the signal, separated the targets. Time passed, but not much. The solution began to form. On the command ship nearby, senior officers watched silently, including the admiral who had refused approval. No one spoke. Solution ready. The order was given. Fire. The first salvo hit the water near the target. Close. Very close. A bracket, which in naval combat means the next shot will likely hit. Second salvo. Direct hit, no visual contact had been made yet. The target had been hit before it was even seen. Silence on the observation deck. Then the system moved to the second target. Faster this time. New solution. Fire. Hit. Third target. Harder movement trying to escape. But the system adapted. Tracked. Predicted. Fire. Hit. All 3 targets. Engaged and destroyed in just over 4 minutes. The previous record using traditional methods had taken more than double that time. No debate was needed anymore. The admiral lowered his binoculars, paused, then gave a simple order. Bring me the full documentation. By morning, the decision was made. Authorization signed. What had once been an unauthorized modification was now official doctrine. And the impact was immediate. Ships began adapting the system. Training started. Installations spread. Not smoothly, not perfectly. There were problems, mistakes, even failures. One ship installed the system incorrectly. Its shots missed completely, a wiring error. For a moment it looked like the doubts had been right. But the problem wasn't the idea, it was execution. The system was corrected, improved, standardized, and then it began to scale. More ships, more crews, and the results became impossible to ignore. Battles became shorter, more controlled, more one-sided. Enemy ships that once dominated night combat were now being hit before they could respond. Confusion spread on the other side. Reports described something unnatural. Gunfire arriving with no warning, no visible source, accurate from the first shot. They tried to adapt, change tactics, move faster, fire earlier. That they were reacting to a system they didn't fully understand, and that made every adjustment weaker than it should have been, because the real change was not visible. It was happening in silence, radar, tracking, prediction. A fight where one side could see and the other could not. And once that advantage spread across multiple ships, the outcome was no longer balanced. In one engagement, 3 enemy ships were intercepted at long range. Before they could react, they were already under fire. 1 destroyed, 1 disabled, 1 forced to flee. American losses? 0. No damage, no casualties. This pattern repeated again and again, and slowly something changed. Enemy commanders who once relied on darkness started avoiding it because darkness was no longer safe. And that shift may have done more than any single battle, because battles avoided are lives saved. Ships that turn away never become wrecks, and over time those decisions add up. Historians would later estimate that this shift in night combat shortened parts of the war by months. Months. In a war where thousands were dying every single month, all because of one idea. A simple one: use radar first, not as backup, as the main system. But here is the part most people never hear. The man who built it was not famous. He didn't become a public hero. There were no headlines, no interviews. His name was not written in most official reports. After the war, he went home, back to normal life, fixing electronics, repairing equipment. Quiet, unknown, the system he built continued to evolve. It became standard, then advanced, then essential, and eventually it became the foundation of modern naval combat systems. Systems that are still used today, all built on the same idea. You don't need to see the enemy to defeat them. But the most important lesson from this story is not about technology. It's about something else: how hard it is for systems to accept change, even when that change is correct, even when it saves lives. Because institutions don't reject ideas because they are wrong. They reject them because they come from the wrong place, the wrong rank, the wrong person, the wrong time. And while that argument is happening, the cost is paid somewhere else. In this case, on ships, in the dark, where seconds decided everything. In the end, the idea won. But it took time, resistance, risk, and one person who refused to stop because he believed something simple: if it works, it should be used, no matter who says otherwise. And in the Pacific, in 1944, that belief changed the outcome of a war.